Awesome. Well, thank you for meeting with us, Allie. And
It's my pleasure.
I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and
Sure.
all the awesome endeavors you're under.
Also, it's great to meet you. I don't think I've ever met you
Yes.
Yes.
before.
Well,
Is
first,
it Adrian?
Adrian is fine.
Adrian's fine.
He likes
Okay.
that better though.
I
Yeah.
like Adrian. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you. Okay, I'm Allie. I am wow, it's weird. Actually, I'm not used to doing this with headphones on. It's like sort of bizarre, but I'm a philosopher and a multidisciplinary artist. So I have been a singer my whole life, and I started out I did a lot of musical theater growing up, and then I ended up going to college and studying philosophy. And then I also studied opera there. So then I went and I did a master's in opera.
Wow.
And then I started to make all my own work. And now I like to write and direct my own projects. I wrote like a cabaret play that I performed at Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2019, which was a really fun experience. And now I'm very interested in like filmmaking. I've acted in some films, I've directed a thing. And so, yeah, I'm kind of balancing my work between writing, and I'm writing a book, and I have a podcast. I'm a utopian philosopher. So basically, I just think a lot about like how do we envision the ideal human society and what's standing in our way as a culture from creating something like that. And then the rest of my work is mostly singing and writing and like just getting into filmmaking recently. And yeah, art and philosophy. That's kind of my jam.
Wow. Yeah. I I totally get that. And I love how diverse you are. I mean, it seems sort of like uh naturally going into these different fields. They're kind of like mingled together, but I would love to see this further develop into what it's growing into. It seems like you are going to be able to use media like sound and video to further this utopian uh, mentality or this mindset to bring it onto the collective. And I love that. That's I see why Candy uh, and yourself are great friends, and I'm glad to be having you on so we can explore more together and see what we can co-create.
Cool, man.
Even
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
yeah, we're already co-creating. Yeah, like, yeah,
Here we are.
it's awesome. How
Well, to give a little bit of background, Allie and I are actually part of this spiritual group coaching, and that's how we met. And,
Mhm.
you know, I think it's fascinating too because, I mean, not to get all spiritual and woo woo, but Ellie and I are actually the same human design type and profile, which I find fascinating because it's like, finally, someone who understands.
Relatable.
And yet, at the same time, very diverse, very like different, right? Because our
Yeah.
backgrounds and our experiences make up what we currently are experiencing. And I want to kind of start our conversation. We were in one of the group chats, and I wanted to so badly respond to you at that time, but I'm like, you know what, this would be a good topic for our podcast.
Sure.
Adrian and I are big on like developing a business that's built around like consciousness and like being mindful when it comes to like making money. I know that's not the case for everyone because as consumers, in our society, oftentimes we may subscribe to businesses that may not have the best practices in mind, may not be coming from a holistic or sustainable approach. And there was something that you mentioned. I haven't read the book yet, but it did sound interesting to me. And why don't you mention the title so I don't butcher the name of the automatic.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Fully Automated Luxury Communism by Aaron
Okay.
Bastani.
And then okay, so that keyword that
Yes.
triggered me,
Yeah.
communism, I
Communism.
mentioned to you,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'm not really into communism, but yeah, I'll check it out. I'm always open-minded. And then you're like, I'd like you to, you wanted me to
Yeah.
dig in a little deeper. And it's funny because I have this, I guess, conditioning around, when we learn about communism in history,
Hmm.
and like, honestly, the first word that popped in my head at the time when you're like, well, I'd like you to reconsider. And all I could think about was, well, Cuba and like, all these
Hmm.
other
Yeah.
constructs of what I guess the modern human would consider communist. So
Yeah.
why don't you dig in a little deeper, maybe your take on the subject? Because I know it can be very controversial, but we're
Yeah.
here for it and we're open
Right.
to hearing your take and
Yeah.
learning
I mean,
things.
like on the topic of that conversation that we had, like there's so many different things to say about them.
Mhm.
I think the very important first thing to say is that I'm not a communist. I don't identify as a communist. I'm not an advocate for communism. And there's a number of reasons why that is. One of them primarily being that like I haven't even read like Marx. I haven't studied communism in depth. I know from my thinking and talking and writing and speaking about my utopian philosophy that there's a lot of overlap between a lot of the values that I have and what communism is when you really look at it. And so, a lot of times I'll talk about ideas and people will be like, oh yeah, that's communism. And so what I've really come to understand about communism is that first of all, actual communism, like the actual philosophy put forth by Marx, is very different than what we colloquially think of as communism. And so I think that it's really, really important for people to be able to distinguish between an idea that they have about something that they've kind of gotten from the ways that their society portrays it, and like actually seeking to understand that thing specifically. And so, and I'm going to try to decide what order I want to say these things in. I think uh, the other reason I don't identify as a communist is that I just don't think that those labels are very helpful. Like, I find that a lot of the conversations that I witness about communism ultimately boil down to people having a conversation about like what communism is and isn't, as opposed to like what will make the world a better place. And so, I'm not really interested in like having conversations about like what constitutes communism, as opposed to a conversation about like, okay, what ideas did Marx have that I think are really effective and valuable, and what ideas like do we not think will work, as opposed to like people come up with these models for how the future should be, and then we have to like pick a camp,
Mm.
right? And so I think a lot of people with a lot of kinds of things, I remember, this will be like a little side tangent, but like I watched this critical video of Jordan Peterson by this one philosopher on YouTube. And that philosopher's entire argument was that Jordan Peterson doesn't understand what postmodernism is,
Mm.
and that he like mislabels things as postmodernist. And I'm just like, this is a waste of my time. Like, this critique you have of this thinker that he's mislabeling things as postmodernist is not like saying anything of meaning about like the actual content of his work or like his philosophy and like what effect it can have on us as a society. So I think in general labels can be really problematic and dangerous. The other thing I want to say about communism and its sort of like his like um, position as something very misunderstood is like, just because people create a society in the name of communism doesn't mean that that society reflects the intentions of the creator of communism. And I have yet to read this book, but I saw a book called something like Socialism, the Bad Idea That Won't Die. And my understanding of the book is that it's basically a summary of all of the failed socialist experiments that have been attempted, and why those things prove that socialism is um, inevitably a failure. And I
Mm.
think the really big problem with that is that there are a number of specific variables I could point to for why communism has not worked or why socialism hasn't worked in the experiments that have taken place. The primary one is that like we are living in a global capitalist economy. So you like cannot have a successful socialist microstructure within a global economy that is capitalist, because that there will be no way for like that country to interface with the rest of the world to be able to like have the kinds of things that we're able to create for ourselves as a planet. So in my opinion, like a utopia, quote unquote, it's not an isolated like thing, it's a global culture, it's a global economy. So that's one of the things that I think, people like to imagine, and a big core part of my work, sorry, I'll be done with my monologue in like
No.
a big core part of my work is pointing out these flaws in reasoning that people make that limit them from seeing what's possible for humans. And so they say, oh, well, because I've never seen XYZ thing happen, it can't. Or because this has never worked, it can never work. Or because humans have always been this way since, history had began, and humans have to be this way forever. And things like I could sit here and break down various arguments that I hear about this and why they don't make sense, but I think that's a really good example of people going, oh, communism or socialism or whatever, it can't work because we have these examples. And it's like, yeah, if we sat here and broke down the common variables that were preventing those things from working, you would realize that it's not like universally disproving the possibility of this concept. So I'm getting really abstract in my verbiage. So the other thing I'll say about that is that fully automated luxury communism actually has nothing to do with communism.
I know
you talk about communism at all.
You mentioned that the title is very misleading, and I'm like, ooh, well, I'm even more curious now to learn and read the book. And it's funny because I'm just gonna go based off this previous conversation. If someone will stop yelling. You mentioned
they have something to say.
Yeah, I'm trying to look for the notes. Sorry.
It's like, let's bring change.
Like, I'm a communist.
Let's have open minds. Come on.
And so I know that you mentioned you are somewhat of an anti-capitalist because you see that there's scarcity in the current model of capitalism. And I said, right, I don't like subscribing to like the work hard and hustle mentality. And you're like, I'm curious, you wanted to dig in a little deeper. And the reason for that is I find that even like on a human design spiritual perspective is that we're all wired differently, and yet in society it's like capitalism thrives on generators, right? Like the concept of this like rat race, like just constantly on, constantly producing, constantly creating. And so it's been very difficult for me as a creative to just really tap out of that system of, well, I obviously would like to have, create wealth for me and my family, but at the same time it's this challenge. It's like feels almost counterintuitive. Well, a lot of people out there who are wealthy, they just say work hard and hustle. And
yeah, but I feel like there's a value system that's being put into play, which is this valuing the money, capital. But hey, what if value or this capital can be, I guess, projected or placed on the environment, like having the welfare of our ecosystem? That could be a value that some way or another of maybe determining a measure, a value system there that can say, oh, more trees planted is a gain for our shareholders, instead of just having money to be the gain that the shareholders are trying to grow each year, each quarter. And that's really
and welfare of their employees, and like and everybody,
welfare of employees. I read this. We read this Conscious Capitalism book. Co-founder of Whole Foods co-authored this book. They talk about a lot of I guess a win-win-win scenario. So having not only your shareholders but all the constituents of any negotiation, of any agreement, being uh, beneficiaries or benefiting directly from these agreements, these outcomes, these uh, business ideas or business endeavors, having not only the shareholders, but also the employees, the customers win, and the, uh, I guess, what I lost the term, but pretty much the people who produce your product, having them win as
Mhm.
well as also the logistics part of it. These people that are just transporting goods, having them win. There's so many parts
Mhm.
in business, and usually we're just thinking about the price and how much I'm going to gain. So that's in value. That's what we value as capitalists. And usually, if you're, in the plus and the green side of things, then you're winning, and you're adding more to the pockets of the shareholders. Therefore, your business is successful. But I'm willing to argue the fact that we're not considering the whole pie. We're just
Right.
focused on this little part of it, and that, uh, I guess, can be looked at sort of socialistic, thinking about the well-being of the whole of of the community, of the employees, of the customers. It, when you consider these things,
Mm.
you really have to make different choices. Uh, for example, being a big business that produces a lot of products, and what happens to the waste, or what happens to the plastic that this product is wrapped in? Like,
Mm.
considering these consequences or results from negotiations from business, uh, to also tie up those loose ends. Like, it's not the consumer's fault that they have a lot of trash. It's
Mm.
essentially our fault as a business, because I wrapped my product in this trash. Like,
Yes.
having these big conglomerates, having these big conglomerates be responsible, held accountable for some of this waste, uh, remedial, or eradicating this waste,
Mhm.
helping the trash problem, like, just as an example, that
Mm.
could be a
You
whole
know,
different way of looking at capitalism, a whole different way of thinking, of moving about business.
it reminds me of the documentary we had seen, or I think it was a docu-series on Netflix. Broken, was it? I don't remember the exact name. Um, but it was talking about in the 70s when like the different beverage and companies started started pushing on this concept that as consumers, we're the ones who need to be recycling and whatnot. And it's what, like Adrian said, that actually, as a business, it's our responsibility to also create a product that's not, in a sense, more sustainable and creating less waste. But
It,
that's our, I mean, there's so many nuances in that. But I'd love to hear if you have any like agreement or disagreements on
Mm.
what was just stated.
I mean, I think that there's kind of two conversations that were, there's the conversation, there's like the super end game conversation, which is the conversation that I'm having as an anti-capitalist. And then there's the kind of like immediate, like, how can we make capitalism better since we're like inside of it right now? So I'm curious from the perspective of you or the book that you read, like if there's a definition that's put forth of conscious capitalism, because effectively, I did want to go back and clarify that I did not say that there's scarcity in the version of capitalism we have right now. What I said is that scarcity is baked into the concept of capitalism, period.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to have capitalism without that relying on scarcity and competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that because that is a inalienable aspect of capitalism, you cannot have capitalism without scarcity and competition. It inevitably would be impossible to have a capitalist economy that would be like the level of egalitarian utopia that I'm like arguing is possible for humans.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think that conscious capitalism is a great stepping stone to an eventual, cooperation-based economy and societal structure? Absolutely. So from the perspective of, but I just think it's very important that we discuss the fact that like those measures you're describing, those like changes, those are not things that capitalism motivates. Those are things that we have to temper capitalism in order to accommodate, right? Like, and there, to a certain extent nowadays, like, so one of the things I love to talk about a lot is like the concept of luxury. I think that like there's definitely different versions of capitalism, and there's different versions of like living in like the values that we hold as a society. And so right now, the idea that some things are valuable or some things are luxurious used to be like, some things are luxurious because they're scarce. Some things are luxurious because they have a specific label. But one version of interpreting luxury that's been coming up now is like sustainability, right? People are like, oh, it's luxurious because it's made of like sustainable. But then again, like you guys were saying, it's on the consumer to pay extra for that, instead of just like a compulsory value system that all companies have to follow, that we shouldn't even be able to have access to incredibly wasteful, harmful products, and we shouldn't be forced to pay like so much more for something that aligns with our values. So in that way, I think that capitalism, like it has started to be the case that people are willing to invest more for like more sustainability. And in that way, capitalism can motivate some change. But I do think there's kind of a cap on it, because capitalism, the ultimate valuation metric for capitalism is profit. And so at a certain point, you can only make so many sacrifices to the bottom line in order to serve, like what Adrian was saying, the environment as being like a way that we value things, and so I have a number, I mean, effectively the entire core philosophy of my work is that the thing that has to happen to have a better, different, utopian-ish society is that our values have to change.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I was like, it's one of the variables I was going to mention before about, failed communist experiments, is that every communist society that's ever existed has been run by people who were socialized under capitalist values to desire power, to desire, like it's like totalitarian governments. I mean, that's a capitalist mindset. Sorry, what?
Centralizing of this power and the money.
Exactly.
Yeah, like
that mindset is capitalist socialization, right? That mad grab for power, the competition to be the most powerful, or to like be in control. So to me, it's like we literally have to, over time, become a species where, like, as a little small tangent, Christopher Ryan, who wrote Sex at Dawn and Civilized to Death, who both of those are basically like books that review kind of like anthropological evidence for like prehistoric human societies. And one of the things that he mentions in that is that like all of the societies that exist that have been observed by anthropologists that reflect the same conditions as pre-agricultural human societies have this baked in kind of shaming mechanism when people try to get like too much power or like try to be too individualistic. And so, if we are living in a society where everyone values benefiting the collective and benefiting the earth, then the ways that production of goods, etc., functions are like very different. Like you wouldn't even be able to do a lot of the shit that companies are getting away with now.
Well, it would be automatically brought to the face of the people who have a say by the employees or by the people witnessing such atrocities like dumping into the ocean, or as an example of the different bad practices that these big companies do decide to undergo. And having having the value system switched as you propose would have that in place by, well, in essence, by everyone really. So you would be, if you, I mean, if you're acting in line, you being able to, or you acting in line is pretty much being acknowledged or by society that, oh, they're taking care of the environment and having these value systems held to a high standard, therefore they're great, and having this approval will would be beneficial for a company in a utopian-ish
Well, in a utopian-ish society, I mean, in the one I'm talking, like, again, we got to talk long game versus immediate game, right? So the version you're talking about right now is effectively conscious capitalism, right? Where there's still such a thing as like a company that like it's sort of, yeah, I mean, I don't like all like I don't want to go like
okay, so that was
it's sort
like
of,
my idea meshing with the
well, it's just like I haven't sat here and explained in depth like my vision for like a utopian future. And so it's very natural that when I talk to people about it and we haven't really dived in a lot, they're still envisioning a society that looks a lot like the one that we're living in now, where,
yeah.
you know, there's um, the economy and the industries are very similar. So in this way, I think, yeah, talking about conscious capitalism from this perspective of like, yes, we could eventually get to a point where it would be very difficult for you to survive as a country, as a company, if like the population of our world knew that you were like dumping toxins into the ocean. Like people just wouldn't buy your shit.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, there's this new book I just started. I won't go too deep into it, but it piqued my interest because it's this. Well, the title is the Blue Ocean Strategy. Remember the author, but
I've heard about this.
it's basically like a lot of people in when they, you know, as entrepreneurs, when we start a business, sometimes we'll be so I guess, like you said, struck on like, oh, there's competition and profit. And, you know, obviously those are important variables to some degree. But the author's argument is why not pretty much go where the ocean is blue instead of going in the red ocean? Yeah. Like create something completely new and then, you know, let others catch up to you basically. And
But sorry.
no, yeah. And so Adrian and well, I do just have to give a little, you know, background that our human design profiles, you're a manifester, we are manifestors. And, you know, in today's, it's become a bit of a trendy word in a sense, but I find that as manifestors, what we've learned is that we are really here to trailblaze and disrupt what's currently playing out in society. So I just find it fascinating that, you know, all of us have this like almost forward thinking, bigger picture, you know, mindset. But if there's anything else that you want to share with our audience, I know we're running out of time here, but please feel free to.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what you just said, I'll say that. Oh my god, I just like lost my train of thought. I have ADD. So because you were saying before the manifestor thing, you guys were saying, oh, the blue ocean strategy. Yeah, so like I think one of the things about the blue ocean strategy is like that's fine, but I think like one of the problems with capitalism and with the way that businesses are being considered today is that like again, one of the big problems is the idea that like whatever you can sell is like worth making, you know? And so it's like, oh, if I can get money in exchange for this, that's the only metric by which I have to measure this thing. And so, you know, we're weirdly living in a society where a lot of people have companies that are not built on actually creating anything of value. Like there's a lot of people whose their whole career is teaching other people how to make money. And so we're just in this like weird valueless loop where it's like just money about money. Like it's just this meta fucking economy where like everyone's making money teaching other people how to make money, you know?
Even in the spiritual community, I'm shocked by how much that's like the, you know, the key word now is abundance, and like, and I'm all for it, but at the same time, I feel challenged, an internal challenge when it comes to like, well, we should be able to thrive, right? And as creatives and artists, I think about artists in the past, like, were they really making, you know, these amazing paintings? Yes, some of them, right? Some of them that were commissioned or whatnot, but just, I don't know, there's just so many nuances.
Yeah, I guess I was hitting on that same note, which is our value system, the metrics that we use, they really need to catch up to the way that we have been advancing these recent years, which is like technology, for example, has been every year there's something new, and just up leveling the different types of, of processing capabilities of our phones and this technology, and like, but we have the same, I mean, the way business was done 100 years ago is still the same way that you do it. And like, what the heck? Okay, we have rocket ship spoons per se as tools, like considering the spoon to be a tool, and we have these rocket ship spoons, but we still operating with the mind frame of I have the bigger club and I club you, therefore my company wins. Like, no, it's like they with this new technology, the way that we can find ease in the new ways of moving, uh, it just because we have been doing it a certain way, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like, that's a stubborn way of looking at things, a very masculine way, I will say, of looking at things. How about a harmonious way? How about being like nature, how the root systems, they're all intertwined and through the mycelial network. And if we look at nature and the subtleties, we notice that nature is harmony. And that's the way nature results in not having waste. And there's no waste, and it's always purposeful. And if we turn to nature, we can learn a lot, as I'm sure you can agree, and a lot of us, we have been noticing more and more, hearing even like turn to nature or go out in the walk and decompress. It's it's a it's a necessary way in my eyes of moving forward. And I don't know, that's, I guess that's what Candy and I, or what I am willing to bring to the world, like to just expose new ideas and expose, hey, there's always a different way to do things. And I love the way that you bring it about, which is
I think your podcast, by the way, is excellent. Just I love how it's utopian-ish.
Utopish.
Just
it's
I mean, it's a bummer there's only a few minutes, because I think what we're starting to hit on now with regard to technology and nature is like a pretty deep and wide topic. But I will say that, like, you know, it's very important to be able to have nuanced conversations about nature. Like, I think that nature is a very varied and complex organism, and you could just as easily look at some parts of nature and be like, see, competition, like dog eat dog, lions, whatever. And so, but again, it's like, it's important to not just extrapolate like one kind of very polarized view of what nature is, but to really discuss the intricacies of like healthy competition and like healthy hierarchy and just all of these, like you said, like effectively permaculture. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of permaculture, but like I think what you're describing is very much aligned with like, how do we emulate this quality that nature has, where just everything gets recycled back in on itself and is used in a like a cyclical way. There was something you said earlier that I wanted to respond to. What was it? It was before the nature. Technology. So yeah, I mean, I think one really interesting thing that you were talking about with regard to technology is like, you know, social philosophers for a long time have been looking at the trajectory of technology and being like, cool, like pretty soon in the future, like we're not even going to really have to work. One of the big problems with capitalism is that it resists automation. And so then you can't automate things because you can't take people's jobs away. And so I opened my newsletter recently with this question of like, what if we lived in a society? I was thinking about the concept of abortion because I talk to a lot of people who don't have a very clear understanding of like why they have the opinion on that topic that they have. And we don't have a population that really understands the nature of like what ethical arguments are or like what rights are, right? Like rights are not like a law of nature that we just like received from the heavens. We're making them up. We're like inventing them, you know? And so people will be like, oh, right to life. And you're like, we need to actually meaningfully discuss that and like what that means. But the thing I was saying was like, what if we, and this is true of many early societies, like where infanticide was like they didn't have abortion, but they've just like leave babies in the cold because, you know, there was a time when if a baby was born to if you were going to raise a human in your society, it was your responsibility as a society to provide for that human.
Wow. Yeah.
And now we have this idea that like, we're not allowed to get rid of any fetuses, but we don't owe that fetus anything, right? And so my question was like, what if we lived into a society that refused to bring any people into the world unless we were willing to 100% provide for that human? You know, and so then it wouldn't have to be like, oh, automation is going to take my job or whatever. You know, it's like, we're just living in a society where we understand that our obligation as a society is to share the like resources that we've constructed with everyone that we invite into our society, because inviting people into our society is a choice, and it's not their choice, it's ours. Right? Like, I mean, there are people in the spiritual community who would argue with that, but like that's, you know, my whole thing is, it's like, why are we living in a system where we can't even automate, where we like can't make life easier on ourselves because we have this bizarre idea that like everyone has to earn their living and no one gets a free pat. Like, it's fucking toxic.
Yes. I think, okay, darn, I think we're out of time. But we have to invite you because these are just such
This
juicy.
Isn't even the tip of the
iceberg.
Oh, not even. Yeah, for sure.
And I love that you mentioned automate, because see, we came from like that whole hustler and learning that really didn't work with our energy type. Prior to even knowing all the human design stuff, I was just like, geez, something's just off. Like, I don't like this idea of always grinding and hustling just to get what we desire, which is pretty much just comfortability and maybe a little bit of extra cash, you know. And this whole